Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Redberryweo here, and welcome back to another quick Civil Air Patrol video. Well, today's video may not be as quick. It's actually probably going to be one of the longer videos on the channel. So, as you may or may not be aware, I've been putting together a Learn to Lead series, which is the leadership textbook that Civil Air Patrol uses. And there's 4 different volumes, and I've actually done summary videos for chapters 1 through 9 as of recording this one. And so, because people have said that these are very useful videos, that it's just like listening through the information is pretty helpful. I know it was challenging for me to get through some of the stuff in Volume 3 and Volume 4, so hopefully this is useful for you, and if you do find these to be useful videos, then you can always share these resources with other people if you find them to facilitate your learning and understanding of the material. I did put together a nice little study guide, and so I'm going to be referencing my study guide. The study guide is based off of the Learn to Lead Chapter 10. It's called The Staff Officer. Please keep in mind that I am not going over everything. I am going over the broad strokes. It's going to be a detailed overview, but it's not necessarily word for word verbatim of me going through the chapter. So if you are taking a test, like if you're going to be taking a milestone test soon, or if you're preparing for spots perhaps, then I strongly recommend you at least take a look and read through the chapter first before you watch this video. Yes, you can watch this video, but there's that cool little SQ3R technique, which is the survey, question, recall, review. You can do that in the book first, and then come here. Hopefully, now that you are at this point of the video, you have already read it. If you have not, then that is a choice. But we're going to go ahead and go through Chapter 10 of Learn to Lead. So the first thing that is discussed in the chapter is an organization versus a team. An organization is a body of individuals that is defined under a set of rules in addition to expectations and procedures, while they are working towards some identified objectives and goals. Okay, so I wanted to write some stuff down and show you all a little diagram here. And so, oh no, does my marker not work? Oh no. Oh no, it may not work. Okay, well, can you read that? Can you see that? Do I have a better marker? I'm gonna hope you can see this. Okay? At the very top of the organization, you have something called the strategic apex. And the strategic apex is like the final authority of the entire organization. So if you think of it in like a squadron command structure, that's going to be your squadron commander. And so then there are 2 sides of this. There's something called the techno structure. And I'm just saying, yeah, so that's your techno structure right there. And then on the other side, there's the support staff. And I'm writing it right here. So there's your support staff. And then underneath that, you've got the middle line. Right there. And then underneath middle line, you have the operating core. Okay? So that's generally what the organization looks like, okay? Then there's the middle line, and so that is the direct supervision of the operating core. So if you think of the operating core as a flight, then the middle line is going to be a flight commander. So then there's the support staff side, which it focuses in on anything that is not mission related. So if you think of admin, finance, logistics, those are support side, but then the techno structure is anything directly relating to the organization's mission. So in Civil Air Patrol, our mission areas are like cadet programs, aerospace, emergency services. People who are on the staff positions for those are considered to be in the techno structure. The next portion talks about hierarchy versus chaos, which, if you're familiar with the different logical fallacies that were previously discussed in a previous chapter, it is actually a false dilemma, and there is actually no perfect organizational structure, and there's cases to be made for both chaos and for hierarchy, and I'll go into a little bit for both. So the case to be made for hierarchy is that at the end of the day, one person is responsible. Remember that whole hierarchy thing here that we had for organization? The strategic apex, that one person is responsible at the end of the day to make sure that the mission is being accomplished. Yes, other people are part of making sure that it is being accomplished, and they are supporting everything relating to that team so that they can accomplish the mission, but the strategic apex is responsible at the end of the day. And a team of teams is formed when you have a hierarchy. That also helps with span of control. Span of control being that it is easy to manage the team. Like if you are in a squadron and your squadron has 100 people, it is very difficult for one person to be in charge of 100 people. But by having smaller teams, like having individual support teams, having individual flights, and being able to have that sub-hierarchy, you're able to reduce how much control each of the teams have, and you can have a smooth flow of communications from top to bottom and bottom to top when going back and forth. And typically a hierarchy is much more efficient because it's a team of teams where you are working with those subcomponents with the limited span of control. There is also a case to be made for chaos. While I may not be a fan of it, some people might be. It's a bit more freeform, which essentially means that self-directed teams allows for everyone on the team to be empowered. So it isn't just falling on one person to make sure stuff is getting done. It just kind of falls on to everyone. And instead of the hierarchy and politics and bureaucracy getting in the way and having to like pass stuff up and pass stuff down, just kind of like let stuff float around. And that is a system that can be used. While I'm, again, not a huge fan of it, I do like to have a blend of making sure that people are empowered while also having a bit of structure. So there is no necessarily perfect organizational structure. That's the main takeaway from this. So you can focus on having a really strict hierarchy, or you could have just chaos. But there is no right answer because it's a false dilemma. There is a brief section about executive officers, and essentially to summarize it, the point is to make the boss's life easier. So anticipating what your commander needs in terms of support and following up and helping support that. And another key skill associated with that is also managing up, which means you are providing feedback and support to the commander while also respecting the commander's authority as they are carrying out their duties. And another thing to briefly mention about organizations is that each component of the organization should be working to support the organization's strategy. And strategy is that long-term approach that an organization takes in like 5 years from now. Where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? And that ties in with vision, but strategy and vision go hand in hand. Next part is committees, and committees are small groups of people that come together and are formed into a committee because they are set to evaluate a specific issue, and then they either make a recommendation or they perform some kind of action to help with supporting that issue. So committees versus just an individual is that anyone's viewpoint is valuable, and by having a couple of people work together, it can allow for more ideas, it can allow for smarter thinking, and it can increase the legitimacy of thoughts and ideas being put together because it's several people rather than just one individual. So here are a couple of reasons why you might create a committee. Maybe you want to have an in-depth discussion about a specific topic. Maybe you want to have a small size group and just focus in on that specific thing. Like some squadrons have issues or challenges with implementing their feedback forms. and being able to have feedback done once per phase for every cadet in their unit. Some units are really big, sometimes there's limited senior member support. Whatever the issue is that the team figures out, the committee figures out, a committee might be tasked with, hey, the challenge is that we are not getting these feedback forms done. Please come together, discuss, and think as a team, and then make a recommendation afterwards of what the squadron should proceed with in order to overcome this. Another reason why for a committee is that you can have divided labor, specialization, and special handling of the specific issues that are arising. There are two different types of committees. The first one is a standing committee, which is an indefinite length of time. And then there is a select committee, which is typically temporary, and it's normally like a one-time sort of thing. So as an example for like a standing committee is that squadrons are required to have a standing finance committee if they have any money. So that will always exist regardless of how much money is in the bank. Money is always going to be something that is being dealt with at the unit, most likely. So you have a standing finance committee. An example of a select committee might be that you all are, like, maybe you're on the CAC and you decide that you want to put together a one-time activity, and that activity is going to be some kind of cadet social for like the group or maybe for the wing. In that example with the select committee, they're only going to plan and put together everything once, and then afterwards it will go away. Maybe that activity could happen again, but it's not going to be the same group of people, and it doesn't just infinitely exist, because you may not do that activity again, and you want to put your time and resources towards other things in between maybe doing that event annually or every 2 years or so. Time for one of my famous mnemonics. And this one is Go Rock, but with an A in it. It's kind of weird. It's Go, G-O, and then R-O-A-C. So it's not rock, it's like roac, Go roac. I don't know. It's what I came up with in order to remember the tools for committee meetings. So we're going to go through this. So the first tool is goal statements. Goal statements help us determine if our meeting was a success or a failure. And at the end of the day, it helps us to evaluate if the committee is necessary. Then the O is objective-driven agendas. And this document is essentially the key document that drives your meetings. It has the topics that you're doing, it has the actions and the outcomes that really help to facilitate to make sure that you are effectively using the committee's time. Read-aheads is something that you send beforehand for people to read ahead of time so that you can make sure that they're aware, they are informed, and they come into the meeting prepared to discuss whatever you are planning to discuss. Then there's oral presentations, which helps to strike the right tone and make sure that the message is clear when having a discussion with the committee. Agenda sequencing and breakouts is essentially making sure that the order of the agenda is from most important to least important, because you want to make sure that the committee's time is being managed effectively. The final tool is closing and minutes, and it allows for a review of what happened during the meeting, and then an email should be sent out within a few days of the meeting happening to summarize the outcomes of what happened with the committee. Let's talk about facilitators. Facilitators are process-focused, and they have a neutral-focused attitude. They're there to kind of just take a step back and be that neutral voice to help come to a consensus at the end of the day. And here's a couple of things that facilitators do. They ask open-ended questions, ask for specificity in response, redirect questions to the group. They invite quiet members to the discussion and hold back dominating members. They record ideas and make them visible to all, help rambling members wrap up their thoughts, in addition to redirecting the energy of combative members. Some of you may or may not be familiar with parliamentary procedures, but to define it, it is a code of rules and ethics established to work in a group. So there are a couple of terms associated with it, and we'll go into each of these. The first term is a quorum, and the quorum is the defined minimum number of members that have to be present for it to legitimately be considered a meeting. So if, let's say, you're working on a team project and you come up with a team that's 6 people big, then maybe in order to have a quorum and have it considered to be like a legitimate team meeting, you would need 4 members. And if you don't have 4 or more, then you don't have a quorum and it's not considered a legit meeting. The order of business is in the minutes. And so you look at the old business first, and then you look at new business. And you should order it based off of the highest priority stuff first, so that you can discuss those things of higher importance, and then the less important things happening later on. With new business, anything new must be submitted in advance, and while there is some open floor discussion typically at the end of the meeting, only emergency matters should be considered. In terms of voting format in parliamentary procedures, verbal voting is the norm, but there is also the option to have secret ballot procedures. If a member in the meeting wants to do something, then the proper verbiage that they would use is "I move to," and then whatever they would like to do. So let's say if they want to take a break, then they could take a break and they could say, "I move to schedule a 10-minute long recess." And then you schedule a recess if enough people agree with it. So now we're going to start moving into management. And there's quite a bit of material in this section about management, so stick with me. Management versus leadership. Management is doing things right versus leadership, which is doing the right thing. Management is the practice of setting and achieving goals by exercising related functions. And so basically it involves just taking charge and making sure that you are better, faster, and more efficient than the competition. And a note within management is that staff officers, while they may not necessarily have subordinates, they are in charge of managing resources. Here's a quick mnemonic for you: CLOP, which is the functions of management. I know it's weird, but hear me out. Controlling, leading, organizing, and planning. Okay? So with the controlling, you're just monitoring the progress to make sure that you're actually getting where you need to be. There's leading, which is monitoring, building, and developing that environment that is supportive of the people who are working in it. Organizing is being able to bring in all the resources and try to do it in the most effective way possible. Then, planning is the process of determining what the goals are for the organization and how do you actually achieve them. Okay, so that's CLOP. Controlling, leading, organizing, and planning. And then the next thing I'm going to talk about is project management, and I'm grabbing my sheet of paper so that I can talk about this. So there are 5 key roles in this, and I'm writing them down on my fun piece of paper because I feel like being fun and creative today. So we've got 5 roles. The first one I am talking about is project sponsor. And project sponsor is the person who gives the task to the project manager. And they are supporting the initiative. So if you want to think of it like you're in school, then in school, your teacher would be the person who is the project sponsor. So if you get a team project, your teacher would be the project sponsor, and then whoever is the team leader would be considered the project manager. Yeah. And so then the project manager is in charge of making sure that day-to-day operations are being accomplished in association with the task. So they'll probably be overseeing multiple tasks. So let's say in your team project you have to write a paper. And in the paper there are several different subtasks. Well, you've got an assistant project manager. Assistant project manager, and the assistant project manager is someone who will help with managing specific parts of a project. So let's say you're like that team lead and you've got 4 sections of the paper. You might have an assistant project manager in charge of making sure 2 of the parts are done, and then you might have another assistant in charge of the other 2 parts, or they might be facilitating 1 portion of that paper being completed. I'm actually going to shift my example a little bit here so that I can talk about the last 2. The last 2 are stakeholders, which I have written down, and I'm going to write down customers. I'm doing a little exclamation mark right there. Customers, yay. Okay, so project sponsor. Let's say I have a light bulb company. I own a light bulb company. I own it. You are one of my managers. And I task you with creating and selling a product for us, like a specific light bulb. Like it's this brand new, awesome, strawberry shaped light bulb. Fun thing, right? So I would be the project sponsor because I am giving you the task to develop this product and make sure it's good to go. As the project manager, you might see it as you have several subtasks associated with developing that light bulb. And so part of it is that you need to actually come up with a design. You need to know what components go into it. You'll need to have an engineer do stuff with it. And so what might help is to have an assistant project manager specializing with the different parts of the development process. So you might have one person who's in charge of figuring out the marketing for this light bulb. Who's going to buy it? How are you going to sell it? Who's your target demographic? You'll also have a team that needs to look into how do you even make this thing? And so you might have assistant project managers facilitating each of those little subcomponents. Stakeholders. In our business, maybe we have someone who gave us some money in order to develop this beautiful strawberry light bulb. That would be a stakeholder because they have a stake, they have something at stake in the project, and they may expect a return in investment at the end of the day. Then there's customers. People are going to buy our beautiful strawberry light bulbs, right? Hopefully, maybe. And so customers are people who are going to consume the project after it's been created. Okay? So that is just an example here of the different key roles associated with project management. So there is a lot in the section about the project life cycle. I am not going to go in depth about that in this video. I will mention my mnemonic for it, and that would be Peeper. Peeper stands for proposal, planning, execution, and review. And each of those is a different phase as part of the project life cycle. To briefly describe, the proposal process is someone's like, hey, I have an idea. The planning is where the team comes together and decides how do they want to accomplish the project's goals. Then there's the execution. You actually do it. You build whatever the product is, and then you deliver it to whoever that customer may be. Then the review is looking at the final deliverables and what feedback did you receive from other people, and if there are any closeouts associated with it, like when I was talking about that stakeholder where someone maybe put in a little bit of money, if they're supposed to get some of that money, some of that revenue generated, that would be part of that closeout process of making sure that they are receiving what they are supposed to receive at the end of the day. And so the process progresses over time where you start at the proposal, you do the planning, execution, and the review as time moves on through the project's life cycle. 2 key terms that I would like to discuss in this: opportunity cost and critical path. To talk about opportunity cost, you need to look at the benefits that you would have gained if you were to take an alternative path to completing the project. Critical path is the longest chain of dependent steps in the project. So, as a recent example for me, I'm doing a group project right now. Fun stuff. I'm doing it. And there is a team member who, at the beginning of the project, agreed to do something. And there are a couple of steps after they do their step that we, as the rest of the team, are dependent on for them to deliver before we can move on to those next steps. If you want to think about that light bulb example, my fun strawberry light bulb example, in this plan to create the light bulb, there are a lot of factors involved. Like, you need to think about where are the raw materials coming from. How do you make a light bulb? What kind of facility would you need in order to build said product? How are you going to package it afterwards? How are you going to distribute it to people? Because I wouldn't be able to just hand someone the light bulb. There's a whole process to it. And so just to make like a single light bulb, there are so many different dependent events. Going through that whole project life cycle thing, the very beginning where you're proposing the idea of like, here's everything that we should potentially do, here's the idea, and then actually planning it. In the plan, you need to look at like the critical path of if something breaks in this path, we're going to have huge problems with this project. And then you need to be able to adjust and be able to mitigate any risks that are posed onto that critical path. And then the last portion of this chapter actually talks about communications. And so something that it mentions about staff communications is that when you are communicating, it's important to be super focused in your writing. And it really strongly recommends using bullet points. And when I say bullet points and like lists, that can mean you have more writing, but it's good to keep bullets focused and concise, because if you think of like the president of an organization, they might have a limited amount of time to read notes that you have to share. And so the point with staff communications is if you keep it brief and to the point and removing any potential fluff, then they can really hone in on your key messaging on what they need to know. Next, let's talk about briefings. Briefings are oral presentations that in Learn to Lead says are to either inform or to advocate. So with my English class, we were taught that it was to either inform, persuade, or entertain, but for briefings, it is only to inform or advocate according to Learn to Lead. So with informational briefings, it's just providing the audience with information. Like, let's say that you are carrying out a squadron meeting and you are briefing the squadron commander of what that squadron meeting is going to be. That's an informational brief. Then there is an advocacy brief or a persuasive brief. Learn to Lead uses the term advocacy. With advocacy, you are advocating for the audience to interpret the information that is being provided in a certain way. So, a advocacy briefing might be if you are trying to advocate for a specific thing to take place. Like my feedback example from earlier. Like, remember we were talking about committees? Call back. We were talking about committees and that a committee might be formed for them to put together a proposal for a squadron that is large to have feedback discussions effectively and make sure that everyone once per phase is sitting down and getting that written feedback. An advocacy brief might be describing that whole process and providing information while simultaneously recommending that the audience take the action, like the squadron commander, take the action of approving that plan so that it can be implemented with the unit. And I have briefly talked about how to put together a persuasive paper when I talked about SDAs, or staff duty analysis. So I will link in the iCard up here the information that you can access, well, that video on writing, persuasive writing specifically, because the structure for a briefing is very similar to how that is structured, because you've got your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. And in the chapter it says intro, body, and close. But the structure inside of the body paragraphs can vary depending on what you need it to do. So let's talk about each of those sections. The introduction, when you have it, you'll greet the audience and you'll state the purpose. A lot of people call that the thesis statement, where you are stating the purpose. So in I think my other video, I made it a while ago, I think my example was about puppies, and puppies are like soft and cute, and as a result, they are the best pet or something. I don't even remember. It was a while ago. That's normally my go-to. I do something with cute puppies because people like puppies most times. So with the introduction, you might provide a little bit of background information, just a little bit, and then you'll have the meat of like, this is the thing that you need to know. And then in your body, it's really all the information that the reader could possibly, or excuse me, the audience could possibly need. And so the way that it's structured, as I was saying, can vary drastically. Like there's cause and effect, chronological, compare and contrast, climatic order, and topical order. With cause and effect, you're looking at an action and its results. With chronological, you are looking at a time sequence. With compare and contrast, you'll have how are they similar and how are they different. With climatic order, it's hierarchical. And then topical order is when there are a group of items that kind of naturally cluster together. Within the conclusion, you need to summarize what you talked about, answer so what, and if there are any action items that the audience needs to do, in addition to offering the audience to ask any questions. So if you look at the staff duty analysis, and you look at the oral presentation rubric, the items that are in Learn to Lead are aligned with what the staff duty analysis discusses. So hopefully, if you are working on staff duty analysis stuff and you haven't watched my SDA video, this is a good little summary for you, but you should watch that in-depth video if you want more info. For a couple of best practices with questions and answers is that whenever someone asks a question, it is recommended that you restate the question so that everyone can hear. If you have a microphone especially, that is a super important point. Because if there's someone like in the back of the room, on like the left side of the room, and they ask their question and you can hear it, and then you just start answering the question, maybe someone on the far right side of the room might be like, what? What did they ask? And that can detract from them being focused on what you're saying. So always try to restate what that person's question was first before answering the question. And then the second thing is that you should really only be answering one question at a time. Some people like to stack multiple questions on top of each other. When that happens, sometimes you only have time for one question from that person. Like if you've got a crowd of 500 people and you've got 20 questions and you only have 5 minutes to answer questions, and someone asks you 3 different things, you might say, hey, just to address your first question, and I've only unfortunately got time for one, I'm going to address that one, and then you can go into the answer. Sometimes there's also the opportunity for you to type up responses afterwards, or for people to ask questions at the end, like maybe write up a thing, fill out a form, like a paper form or a online form of some kind, and then you'd be able to address it online afterwards and respond to them. It honestly depends on the format and everything, but really try your best to address one question at a time. Oh, and another thing to just keep in mind when you're doing briefings is keep in mind what the nonverbal body language is of your audience. For me, whenever I am doing a lesson, not necessarily like a briefing, but if I'm doing a lesson and I see people kind of snoozing off, I will force the entire room to stand up. Some people, they will force people to stand up and switch chairs or switch tables. It really varies depending on what you are comfortable with as a speaker. I at least make people stand up and stretch, and I make them go to the left. And then I make them go to the right. And I'm like, okay, now lean forward. Now lean back. And sometimes we'll do a little roller coaster thing. Just to get the blood moving, because if they're falling asleep, I want them to be engaged. And also, if the audience is having trouble following something and a lot of people are looking confused, then I might go back and readdress that point later on in my brief or before the Q&A, I might say, hey, it seemed like some people were a little confused with this. Let me just clarify, and then briefly clarify, and then offer to answer questions after that. You can have visual aids if you'd like to have visual aids. Some people use PowerPoints. For visual aids, I use this, and I used some additional editing magic in this video too, to help with conveying my message. Visual aids can be useful for some people, and sometimes it can be distracting. If you have a PowerPoint in which you copy and paste an entire essay onto a slide, that may not be the most effective visual aid. But let's say you are briefing an activity. If you're briefing an activity, it might be useful to have a PowerPoint slide that lists the agenda for like the beginning part of the day, and then the second slide might be the second half of the day. And then people will be able to read it. Hopefully the font's big enough so that they can read them from afar. But you want visual aids to help with facilitating your discussion. You also don't want to just read directly off of it. Don't physically turn around away from your audience. Don't turn your back to them. Don't do it. It's no good. And here are just a couple of general best practices with public speaking. Eye contact. I mean, I'm looking at you, right? Not really, I'm looking at my camera. But you feel like I'm looking at you. It feels like I'm talking to you. And not that I'm just like looking at my desk here or talking at my paper. I'm not doing that. I am not doing that. Another thing is you can smile. I don't always do that, but I am normally pretty expressive with my face, so it works out to be able to be super engaging and interesting. Another thing is to avoid super distracting mannerisms. There are some people that I've seen that do public speaking where they'll pull their fingers while they're talking, and it's more of like a nervous thing that they do, but they'll stand there like this, and they'll have like their hands in front of them like this, or like in front of their waist, and they'll just be like pulling on their fingers. That sort of detracts from visually what's going on. It doesn't support the briefing at all. It doesn't really help. So just, if you're doing stuff with your fingers, or if you need to play with like a pen, like let's say you want to, oh, excuse me. There we go. Let's say you want to like do stuff with a pen, do it behind your back so that distracting mannerisms that you are doing are not visible to the audience. Okay? Try your best. Then there's also being personal. Maybe tell a personal anecdote. When I applied for cadet staff back in whatever encampment, the main feedback that I was given was be personal and give a personal anecdote. I was doing an impromptu brief on how to plant a tree, and I got full points except for being able to be personal and give a personal anecdote. And so that point has especially sat with me, just as a point of feedback that I'm like, yes, I understand, and I think that it is important for people to think that you are relatable while also being able to picture themselves in a story, because that'll be very easy to remember. And because I am a psychology buff, I just want to bring up that the reason why you want to have a really strong thesis statement and you want to have a really strong conclusion are because of two things, and that's called recency effect and primacy effect. Recency effect is the thing that you heard most recently, you're going to have a stronger remembrance of. And then primacy effect is something that you initially heard, you're also going to be more likely to remember. And so if you've ever done the name game, it's the same thing, right? When you do the name game, you remember like the first person, you remember maybe the second person, but then when it starts to get to like 3 through 15, it starts to get a little fuzzy. And then when it's like the two or three people sort of in front of you, then there's that there's that recency effect of the 2 or 3 people who are in front of you that you probably remember because they were most recently said. But then there's also something called the next in line effect, where when you are the next person in line, you're most likely to forget the person immediately before you. But these are not necessarily brought up. I just thought it would be interesting to bring up recency and primacy effect, and I guess next in line effect. We have finally made it to the end of chapter 10, everyone. So, thank you for joining me on this very exciting, slightly long adventure, but hopefully, if you got to this point in the video, that means you got something out of it. I really hope so. And if you do have any questions or if there was anything that was a little confusing, please feel free to let me know. I put a lot of time and effort into these videos because I want to make sure that you all have the resources to be successful, because I wish I had these resources when I was in the cadet program. So, since you have made it to this point in the video, I ask that you share what your first memory of Civil Air Patrol was. Regardless of if you are a cadet or senior member watching this, I am very interested to see what you have to share. And if no one comments on it, then I will know that no one made it to the end. But hopefully at least a couple of people made it. I really hope so. But that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And that is all, folks. Until next time. Toodles.